Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're getting into something, well, frankly, it's a bit of a silent epidemic. Cardiovascular diseases. They account for over a third of global deaths.
That's huge.
Yeah, exactly. And you hear this term, atherosclerosis,
Mm-hmm.
the hardening of arteries, talked about like it's just, inevitable if you live long enough.
Yeah.
But is it really? Is that our destiny?
Well, that's what we want to unpack today, isn't it?
Or can we actually steer clear, maybe mitigate it?
That's the mission for this deep dive. We've gone through the sources you sent, trying to pull out the absolute essentials, the strategies, maybe some overlooked insights to really empower you listening.
Right.
So you can prevent or at least manage cardiovascular disease. And look, don't think this isn't relevant if you're young.
Mm-hmm.
The surprising thing is autopsies show signs of this stuff, atherosclerosis, even starting in your 20s.
Wow.
So really, if you care about longevity or managing weight or just, general well-being, this is pretty critical stuff.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So think of this as maybe a shortcut, getting you well-informed, packed with some surprising facts and things you can actually do.
Actionable insights.
Yes. We're going to unpack three main pillars.
Mm-hmm.
Optimal exercise, nutrition focusing on cholesterol, insulin, inflammation, and of course, smoking cessation and blood pressure.
Yeah.
Let's dive in.
Okay.
So let's kick off with atherosclerosis itself. What is it exactly? We hear the term, but what's happening inside our bodies?
Right. So at its core, it's damage. Damage to the inner walls of your arteries. Picture these smooth pathways for blood.
Yeah.
Atherosclerosis is when they get, let's say, nicked or inflamed. And those spots become sticky, plaque starts building up. It's a mix of fats, cholesterol, other gunk.
Okay.
And like you mentioned, the really eye-opening thing from the research is this isn't just an old person's problem. They find early signs, these little fatty streaks, in people in their 20s.
In their 20s?
Yeah, it's often invisible because, well, we don't usually look for it until symptoms show up much later, but the process, it's often already started.
So it's this kind of quiet, slow burn. And you mentioned inflammation. Now, we usually think inflammation is good, right, for healing cuts and stuff. How does it become a villain here?
That's a great point. Because, yeah, acute inflammation is necessary. You need it to heal a wound or fight a virus.
Right.
The problem is chronic inflammation. Think of it like a low-level fire just constantly smoldering inside you.
Okay.
And what's really interesting here is how often insulin resistance, which is often driven by eating too many refined carbs and sugars consistently.
Right, the modern diet stuff.
Exactly. That becomes a huge driver of this chronic inflammation. See, when your blood sugar is always high, your body's pumping out insulin like crazy to deal with it. And all that extra insulin, it messes with your body's ability to produce something called nitric oxide.
Right.
Which is super important.
Nitric oxide.
Yeah.
What does that do? Why is it so crucial?
Think of it as the relaxer for your blood vessels. It signals your arteries to dilate, to widen, so blood flows easily. That's vital for everything.
Yeah.
Peak muscle function, sharp brain function, even male sexual health relies on it.
Right.
So when insulin resistance knocks down nitric oxide production, your arteries lose that flexibility. They get stiffer.
Which leads to higher blood pressure.
Exactly. And it also contributes to that initial damage, that nick in the artery wall where plaque can then grab hold. Plus, too much sugar itself causes oxidative stress, which just adds more fuel to the inflammation fire.
Okay, so this picture is getting clearer. Chronic inflammation, often kicked off by diet, insulin resistance.
Okay.
It's setting the stage. So what's the most obvious, impactful first step we can take with our food?
Well, based on all that, the clearest first step is definitely to reduce the glycemic load of your diet significantly. Practically, yeah. It means cutting way back on processed foods, ditching added sugars, and really shifting towards whole foods, things that don't spike your blood sugar.
Like what? What are good swaps?
So if you want something sweet, maybe grab some berries or a small piece of really dark chocolate, like 80% cacao or more.
Instead of the candy bar.
Right, instead of something that sends your blood sugar and insulin through the roof.
Makes sense. But, habits are hard to break. If someone's really struggled with this for years, are there other tools, other strategies besides just swapping foods?
Oh, absolutely. There's a whole toolkit beyond just food choices. For instance, continuous glucose monitors, CGMs.
Yeah, I've heard of those.
They give you incredibly personalized feedback real-time data on how your specific body reacts to different foods. It's like having a little coach.
That sounds powerful.
It is. But if that's not an option, even just using a good low glycemic food list can help guide choices. And then there are supplements and natural compounds that can lend a hand.
Like what?
Things like soluble fibers. You find them in asparagus, artichokes, onions, garlic. Or you can supplement easily with something like psyllium husk.
How does fiber help here?
It slows down sugar absorption, helps regulate blood sugar, and it feeds your good gut bacteria, which is also linked to metabolic health. Then you have certain plant extracts. Berberine is a popular one, bitter melon extract, even common spices like cinnamon, rosemary. They've shown promise in helping with blood sugar and insulin sensitivity.
Interesting.
And another really potent strategy is intermittent fasting.
Right?
Doing that regularly can drastically lower insulin, glucose, triglycerides. It basically forces your body to switch to burning fat for fuel, giving your whole insulin system a break.
So lots of tools there. Now, we've talked inflammation, insulin. Let's shift to cholesterol. This is one where I think a lot of us feel like we know the basics, but the sources you looked at suggest it's way more complex. Cholesterol isn't just the bad guy.
Not at all. Actually, it's essential. Every single cell in your body needs cholesterol. It's fundamental for building cell walls, giving them flexibility.
Right.
And it's the precursor, the raw material, for making vital hormones, cortisol for stress, testosterone, estrogen, even bile, which you need to digest fat. So no, definitely not inherently bad.
That's a big shift for many people's thinking. And what about the idea that eating cholesterol, like in eggs, directly raises your blood cholesterol? Is that true?
That's probably one of the biggest myths that persists. Here's the kicker. Your body makes most of its own cholesterol, and it's incredibly good at recycling it.
Recycling.
Yeah, you reabsorb a huge amount, maybe 800 to 1,000 milligrams a day, just from bile salts used in digestion. Compare that to the maybe 300 to 500 milligrams you might get from your diet.
So the dietary part is tiny in comparison.
Exactly. It plays a very small role, if any, in your actual blood cholesterol levels for most people.
Okay, so if it's not the cholesterol in our food, what does push up our LDL, the so-called bad cholesterol?
Now that's where saturated fats come into play more significantly. Unlike dietary cholesterol, eating a lot of saturated fat does tend to increase LDL levels in the blood.
Why is that?
Their chemical structure is simpler, making them easier for the body to absorb and then package into those LDL particles for transport. But here's the really crucial perspective shift. LDL itself isn't the enemy. It's basically a delivery truck. It has a necessary job transporting cholesterol to your tissues that need it. The real danger isn't the truck itself.
It's where it parks.
Precisely. It's where it deposits its cargo, especially when those LDL particles get trapped and start accumulating inside your artery walls, contributing to that plaque.
So if LDL isn't inherently bad, but some of it is harmful,
Yeah.
what makes the difference? What are the real markers of dangerous cholesterol we should be looking at?
Right, that's the key question. And the sources point beyond just simple LDL levels to a couple of more specific players. Lipoprotein A, usually written LPA, and ApoB100.
LPA, what's that?
LPA is a specific type or variant of LDL, and it's very strongly linked to cardiovascular risk, particularly if your levels are high, say above 50 milligrams per deciliter. Ideally, you want it much lower, like below 14.
And what makes it so bad?
It has a unique structure that seems to make it extra sticky. It promotes clot formation, it binds easily to oxidized fats, and it's really good at forming those foam cells that are the basis of arterial plaque. It's like LDL's more aggressive cousin.
Sounds nasty.
It is. And then there's ApoB100. You can think of ApoB as the protein address label, or maybe the key on the outside of an LDL particle. It's what allows the LDL particle to dock onto cells, including those in the artery wall, and drop off its cholesterol. So the number of ApoB particles you have floating around is a really strong indicator of risk. More ApoB particles means more potential deliveries into your artery walls.
So it's not just how much cholesterol is in the LDL, but how many LDL particles, how many ApoB trucks are driving around.
Exactly. Measuring LPA and ApoB gives you a much more precise picture of your actual risk than just looking at total LDL.
Are there ways to lower LPA specifically?
Yes, though it can be tricky as it's largely genetic. Niacin, which is vitamin B3, can sometimes lower it significantly, like 20–30%. Carnitine might help too. And for some people, optimizing hormone levels like estrogen or testosterone if they're low might play a role. Statins have a variable effect, sometimes lowering it, sometimes not.
And I remember reading about another one, ApoE. Where does that fit in?
ApoE is interesting because it's generally considered one of the good apolipoproteins. It acts more like a return service.
Taking cholesterol back.
Exactly. It helps shuttle cholesterol back to the liver to be processed and removed from the body. Your ApoE status is largely determined by genetics.
So genetic testing could be useful here.
It definitely can be a strategic tool. Knowing your ApoE variant can tell you if you're genetically predisposed to having more trouble clearing cholesterol, which might mean you need to be even more proactive with prevention.
And particle size. You mentioned that matters too.
Hugely important.
Yeah.
Imagine small, dense, heavy LDL particles versus big, fluffy, light ones. Those small, dense LDL particles are considered more dangerous. They can more easily wiggle their way into the artery wall lining, and critically, you need more ApoB trucks to carry the same total amount of cholesterol if the particles are small and dense.
So more particles, more ApoB, more risk of deposition.
You got it. It's a numbers game.
So it's really a complex picture. What about triglycerides? We hear about those too. How do they fit in?
High triglycerides are basically a big flashing sign that your body isn't burning fat efficiently for energy.
Okay.
It usually points back to metabolic issues, often driven by too many carbs and sugars again. Your liver starts converting excess sugar into triglycerides.
So how do you lower them?
Right.
Especially if someone's maybe trying a higher fat diet.
Two key things consistently come up. Zone 2 aerobic exercise, which we'll get to, and reducing your carbohydrate intake. Even on a high-fat diet, if carbs are low enough and you're doing the right exercise, triglycerides should come down as your body becomes better adapted to burning fat.
Okay, so pulling all this cholesterol and fat info together, what are the really actionable dietary takeaways for improving our profile and lowering risk?
All right, let's get concrete. First, focus on unsaturated fats, the healthy ones. Think nuts, seeds, avocados, extra virgin olive oil, olives. Load up on those.
Good fats in. What about fats out?
Crucially, avoid industrial seed oils. Things like canola, soybeans, sunflower, corn oil. They are packed with omega-6 fatty acids,
Which are inflammatory.
highly inflammatory. Some experts in the sources argue they might even be worse for long-term health than sugar because of the chronic inflammation they drive.
Wow, okay. Big warning there.
Definitely. Now, the absolute king of cardiovascular protection, according to the sources, omega-3 fatty acids.
Fish oil.
Yeah, primarily from fatty fish like salmon, mackerel, sardines, or from algae if you're vegetarian. Seafood in general. You can also supplement AIM for at least a gram of combined EPA and DHA per day.
Okay, omega-3s are key. What else?
Trans fats, the industrial kind, often listed as partially hydrogenated oils in things like margarine, shortening, processed baked goods. Avoid them like the plague.
Why are they so bad?
They're metabolic poison. They directly lower your good HDL cholesterol and significantly raise your bad LDL. Just terrible for your arteries.
Got it. No trans fats. Anything else on the positive side?
Soluble fiber again, we mentioned it for glucose, but it's great for cholesterol too. Psyllium husk, or getting it from veggies like Brussels sprouts, asparagus, broccoli. It helps bind cholesterol in the gut and remove it, and it feeds those good gut bugs. Double win.
Makes sense. So good fats in, bad fats out, omega-3s up, fiber up.
That's a solid foundation. Oh, and one minor note some sources mention. Moderate alcohol can slightly raise HDL, the good cholesterol,
Right.
but it also tends to raise blood pressure and has other potential downsides, so it's definitely not recommended as a health strategy.
Right. Okay. So given all this complexity beyond just LDL and HDL, what tests should people actually be asking their doctors for to get a real sense of their individual risk?
Okay, so beyond the standard lipid panel, total cholesterol, LDL, HDL, maybe triglycerides, and calculating the Castelli index, which is that HDL total ratio,
Yeah.
you really should consider asking about LPA and ApoB. As we discussed, these two give you a much clearer picture of your actual particle-related risk.
Especially if you have other issues.
Exactly, especially if you're dealing with blood sugar problems, metabolic syndrome, if you're overweight. These markers become even more critical.
Are there other, maybe more advanced tests?
Yes. For looking directly at the arteries, even if your blood work looks okay, there's a CIMT test. Carotid intima media thickness. It's an ultrasound of your neck arteries.
What does it show?
It measures the thickness of the artery wall lining. Early thickening can be a sign of atherosclerosis starting, even before significant plaque forms.
Okay. And for older people?
A coronary artery calcium score, or CAC scan, it's a CT scan that specifically looks for calcified plaque deposits in the heart arteries. A 0 score is great. Higher scores indicate existing disease.
And you mentioned genetic testing for ApoE earlier, too.
Right, that can add another layer of personalization,
Yeah.
helping you understand your baseline genetic risk for cholesterol handling.
Okay, that's a much more comprehensive list. Now, one more big question on cholesterol. For people maybe doing keto or paleo diets, they often see their LDL skyrocket. What's going on there? Is it always dangerous?
Yeah, this is a really common point of confusion and debate.
Yeah.
First off, remember that sometimes high cholesterol reflects inherited habits as much as pure genetics.
Hmm.
And while there's a condition called familial hypercholesterolemia where cholesterol is genetically very high, the sources suggest there isn't clear evidence it automatically means a shorter life, though it definitely changes your risk calculations.
But seeing LDL shoot up on a high-fat diet can be alarming.
It can. And it's important to recognize that fixing metabolic issues like insulin resistance with these diets in the short term doesn't guarantee long-term cardiovascular safety. Risks can still emerge.
So what's the guidance?
For people who've used these diets successfully for metabolic health or weight loss, the suggestion is often to think about maybe shifting towards a more balanced, middle ground approach long term. And critically,
Yes.
if your LPA or your ApoB levels are high, regardless of your diet type, then you really need to address that, likely through dietary changes, to mitigate that specific risk. Those markers often trump total LDL insignificance.
And there are different viewpoints on what LDL level is okay, right? Especially in the low-carb world.
Absolutely. Conventional medicine often targets LDL below 100 milli-GDL or even lower for high-risk people. But some low-carb practitioners are less concerned with LDL, even up to 200 sometimes.
If other markers are good.
Exactly. If triglycerides are very low, HDL is high, and inflammation markers are low. The thinking there is that without the underlying inflammation and arterial damage, the LDL isn't as likely to deposit and cause problems.
So it's about the whole picture, not just one number.
Precisely. Context is everything.
Okay, let's shift gears again. Blood pressure. Hypertension. It's called the silent killer. How does this tie into everything else, and why is it so incredibly common?
Well, hypertension is essentially when your blood flow faces too much resistance. Your heart has to pump harder to get blood where it needs to go.
What causes that resistance?
Several things. The viscosity or thickness of your blood plays a role. High cholesterol and high sugar can make blood thicker.
Okay.
And then there's the whole salt debate. It's nuanced. Yes, salt can temporarily raise blood pressure in salt-sensitive people.
But it doesn't cause the disease.
Not directly, no. Salt sensitivity is highly individual, partly genetic. The sources even point to the Korean paradox. Super high sodium intake in South Korea, but low cardiovascular mortality.
Why?
Likely because their diet is also sky high in potassium and magnesium, which counterbalance sodium's effects. And interestingly, for people not hypertensive, getting too little sodium might actually be riskier than getting too much.
Huh. So if it's not just salt, why is hypertension so widespread?
It's often described using the mosaic theory. It's not one thing, but a combination of many factors fitting together.
Like pieces of a puzzle.
Exactly. Pieces like kidney health, inflammation, or damage there is huge. Loss of that arterial flexibility we talked about with insulin resistance, oxidative stress, immune system issues, your gut microbiome balance, even your sympathetic nervous system activity, basically, stress levels.
And genetics.
And genetic susceptibility, yes, all these pieces interact. The overall goal, then, is to reduce that systemic vascular resistance through lifestyle changes that address these pieces.
You mentioned kidney health. How do we track that?
A key measure is your GFR, or glomerular filtration rate. It assesses how well your kidneys are filtering blood. A declining GFR indicates kidney damage, which directly contributes to hypertension and is a sign of, well, biological aging of the kidneys.
So this mosaic theory gives us lots of potential levers to pull. How do we actually lower blood pressure naturally?
Okay, practical steps. Diet first. Get rid of inflammatory foods, processed stuff, those omega-6 oils we mentioned. Dramatically increase omega-3s. Right.
Mineral balance is critical. Boost potassium and magnesium intake. Most adults are deficient. Leafy greens, nuts, seeds, avocados are great sources. These minerals help relax the muscles in your artery walls.
Okay, minerals are key. What else?
Fiber for your gut health. A healthy microbiome actually helps regulate salt metabolism and your stress response.
Interesting connection.
Yeah. Then, actively lower insulin and blood sugar. Lose excess weight that extra fat physically presses on blood vessels. And manage stress. Adaptogens like ashwagandha might help. Meditation, deep breathing, maybe even neurofeedback for some.
Comprehensive approach. Now, the big one, smoking. You said earlier it's maybe the most impactful thing for CV health. You know it's bad. but break down the real damage inside.
It's brutal. The sources are clear. Quitting smoking does more for preventing cardiovascular events than starting exercise or fixing your diet, if you had to pick just one.
Wow. More than diet or exercise. Yes, because smoking wages war on your arteries through multiple chemical pathways. It directly hardens them, causes massive inflammation, oxidizes fats, making them stickier, jacks up your LDL, tanks your HDL,
Great.
and it overstimulates your sympathetic nervous system, directly raising blood pressure. Plus, it damages the endothelium, that delicate inner lining of the arteries, basically paving the way for atherosclerosis.
So hypertension is like mechanical damage, and smoking is chemical damage, but both lead to plaque.
That's a good way to put it. Both create the conditions for cholesterol to deposit and build up. And look, while research is ongoing, cannabis smoking likely carries risks too, maybe less than tobacco just due to frequency for many users, but inhaling smoke isn't benign. Vaping isn't harmless either. Those chemicals can damage lungs. Basically, your lungs are designed for clean air. Anything else is probably causing some harm.
Okay, the message is clear. For people struggling to quit, knowing how tough addiction is, what actually works, what are the best strategies?
Addiction is a two-headed beast, right? There's the biochemical dependence on nicotine, messing with your brain chemistry, especially dopamine. And then there's the behavioral part, the habit, the ritual, the oral fixation, the routines.
So you have to tackle both.
Exactly. On the biochemical side, there are effective prescription meds. Some work by helping stabilize dopamine levels, which can significantly reduce cravings and withdrawal symptoms, maybe doubling success rates. Others kind of flatten the withdrawal curve, making it less intense.
What about nicotine replacement? Patches, gum?
Yeah, nicotine replacement therapy, NRT, is helpful. It lets you manage the physical craving while you focus your energy on breaking the behavioral patterns, the habits. There's also cytosine, a plant-based compound used in some parts of the world.
Any complementary approaches?
Hypnosis actually shows some decent success rates in studies, maybe over 20% for some. And certain supplements like L-tyrosine or mucuna pruriens might offer minor support as dopamine precursors, but they aren't primary treatments.
And the behavioral side?
Stress management is huge, as stress is often a major trigger to light up. Ultimately, it's about using every tool available: meds, NRT, support groups, therapy, stress reduction, plus sheer willpower and discipline. It's a tough battle, but winnable.
Okay, powerful tools there too. Finally, let's talk exercise. A lot of focus goes to muscle building, maybe less on the cardiovascular engine itself. What's the ideal way to exercise for heart health and, importantly, longevity?
Yeah, exercise is incredibly potent medicine, but let's be clear up front. It's powerful, but it generally can't fully outrun a terrible diet or the effects of smoking. You need the whole package.
Right.
The core idea with exercise for longevity revolves around mitochondria, those little energy factories in your cells.
Powerhouses.
Exactly. Mitochondrial dysfunction is really tied to aging and many chronic diseases. So exercise aims to boost their number, their efficiency, their overall capacity.
And how do we measure that benefit?
The single strongest predictor of how long you'll live, according to the research, your VO2 max. That's your body's maximum ability to take in and use oxygen during intense exercise. Higher VO2 max generally equals a longer, healthier life.
Okay, VO2 max is the goal. So what specific types of exercise get us there and boost those mitochondria?
We need to think in terms of two essential training zones that work together. First, the foundation. Zone 2 training, your aerobic base building.
What does Zone 2 feel like?
It's moderate intensity. You should be able to talk, but maybe not comfortably sing. Or another guide is you can sustain breathing just through your nose. Think a brisk walk, a light jog, steady cycling. You feel like you're working, but you could keep going for a while. Maybe around 60–70% of your max heart rate.
And what's happening in the body during Zone 2?
This is where the magic happens from mitochondrial efficiency and fat burning. Zone 2 maximally stimulates your mitochondria to get better at using fat as fuel. This makes you a better fat burner overall, even at rest or higher intensities, which is great for metabolic health and weight management.
So Zone 2 builds the efficient engine. What's the other essential zone?
That would be high-intensity work, often called Zone 5 or HIT, high-intensity interval training. This is what really drives up your VO2 max.
So sprints, all-out effort.
Pretty much short bursts of near maximal effort, like maybe 30 seconds sprinting as hard as you can, then 30 seconds easy recovery, repeated for 10, maybe 20 minutes total.
And that boosts.
It boosts mitochondrial density, meaning you build more mitochondria, and dramatically improves your body's peak oxygen utilization capacity. That's key for longevity and even things like cognitive function.
Okay, Zone 2 for efficiency, Zone 5 HIT for peak capacity. How do we realistically combine these? Do we need to live in the gym?
Not at all. It's about smart allocation. A common recommendation is the 80-20 rule. Spend about 80% of your total aerobic training time in Zone 2 and about 20% doing HIT.
Can you give an example?
Sure. Let's say you dedicate 3 hours a week purely to aerobic work. That would mean roughly 2 hours and 24 minutes of Zone 2 work.
Which could be broken up.
Absolutely. Split it into sessions of at least 30-45 minutes. You could even do Zone 2 as active recovery after lifting weights. And the remaining 35-ish minutes would be dedicated to maybe 2 short, intense HIT sessions.
Okay, that sounds manageable. What about timing? Fasted cardio, before or after weights?
Fasted cardio can slightly increase fat burning during the session, yes. But a key point, avoid doing intense cardio right before strength training.
Why is that?
It can deplete the glycogen your muscles need for lifting heavy, potentially hindering your strength gains. If you do both in one workout,
Strength first.
generally yes, strength train first, then maybe follow with Zone 2 and potentially finish with a short HIT burst if you're up for it. And probably best not to do that whole combo fasted unless you're significantly overweight and prioritizing fat loss above all else. But honestly, the most important thing is consistency. Find a routine you can stick with week after week. That's where the real benefits accumulate.
Wow, okay. We've covered a ton of ground today.
Yeah.
From the microscopic world of atherosclerosis
Yeah.
and the surprising truths about cholesterol to the silent threats of hypertension and smoking. And finally, this powerful prescription for exercise with Zone 2 and HIT. It really feels like we have a solid roadmap now.
Yeah, I think these are genuinely powerful tools, all grounded in solid science. They're tools to help you not just add years to your life, but hopefully add life to your years, you know?
Yeah.
More energy, more vitality.
Definitely.
But really important caveat, if you have existing health conditions, please talk to your doctor before making drastic changes, especially starting high-intensity exercise. Safety first.
Absolutely crucial advice. And, it leaves me with this kind of provocative thought. What if all that stuff we think of as inevitable biological aging, that slow decline?
Yeah.
What if a huge chunk of it is actually just the sum total of preventable factors?
That's a powerful reframe, isn't it?
Yeah, like maybe the real challenge isn't discovering these strategies. We've just laid out a ton of them. Maybe the harder part is finding that consistent courage, that discipline to actually apply them day after day.
That's often where the real work lies. So for everyone listening, maybe just take a moment. Think about what resonated most from our chat today. What's one small, truly actionable step you could take this week? Just one thing to start or continue your journey toward better cardiovascular health.